Have you ever thought about becoming a spy radio operator? Oh, no, I'm not offering you a job. I'm just saying, have you thought about it? You know, I think as ham radio operators, a lot of us would be quite good as spy radio operators. Oh, you need to be able to send and receive Morse code. Yeah, that's cut out a few of you, isn't it? But there's still plenty of us around that can read Morse code. Yes, I know what you're thinking. Yes, some of us would be quite old now for spy radio operators. Yeah, that's a good point. Anyway, I think it's worth thinking back in time to what was required of a spy radio operator, and then coming forward and thinking some of the gear that we've got today, it would make great spy radio gear, wouldn't it? It's interesting, isn't it? Let's just remember what they did and what they used during the Second World War. The heyday of spy radios was probably during World War II. It's when spy radios were used extensively, and there have been great developments in radio communication since the beginning of the war. By the end of the war, some of the radios were quite sophisticated. But during the war, spy radios were the essential tools for intelligence agents. They were operating behind enemy lines. They used these portable wireless transmitters and receivers, which allowed them to spy and to send secret information about troop movements and military installations and that kind of thing. Messages were generally encrypted using codes or ciphers to prevent the interception if enemy forces were monitoring the radio frequencies. However, transmitters and radios generally could be dangerous because it was possible for the enemy to monitor the frequencies and using direction finding equipment locate where these radios were being used. As a result of that, agents frequently moved around to various parts in order to prevent them being spotted by. Yes, in the early part of the war, even the receivers could be detected because they used something called regenerative detectors, and they actually radiated a low-level signal. So even when the agents were just listening, they could be spotted. Of course, in those days, they had to use valves. And valves, by today's standards, are quite large. And valves had something called heaters inside, so there was a measure of power needed to actually heat the valves up. And then you had to have a high tension voltage. There were some battery valves around, but basically the power supply took up quite a sizable space in any suitcase or whatever the radio was carried around in. So they weren't small, they were quite heavy, and certainly quite heavy and large by standards we use today. Could I already have the ultimate spy transceiver? This is a small battery that powers it for several hours. It will deliver 4 or 5 watts on Morse code. It'll even deliver SSB. And with that display, I can accurately tune to any frequency I wish. It's known as the QMX transceiver. So small. I think we all know that the secret of a decent signal is a decent antenna. And me out in the garden with my vertical in broad daylight, it's pretty simple to set up. But it wasn't like that in days gone by. Aerials were erected under cover of darkness, and there was no time to hang around. Yes, it was dangerous stuff. But there was a skill in it, and a skill that was a challenge. And I think it aligns with modern QRP operation. There's a skill in QRP operation, particularly if you're operating POTA or SOTA, something that's on the air or parks on the air. You very often don't know what you're going to meet, whether there's going to be a place to erect an aerial and what aerial you're going to put up, how radio conditions are going to be, how you're going to have to make adjustments to make the best of the location you're in. That's a skill. It's not so far removed from spy radio, is it? Perhaps sometimes we should think, let's treat this as a challenge. Let's see if we can get some signals from this location, even though it's not the best, even though I've got a pretty rubbish aerial. I've got a mast, I've got to string out a bit of wire across a few branches. It's a challenge, isn't it? I know there's not the same danger as would have been the case in war years, World War II, etc. But it's a challenge, isn't it? A few weeks ago, I was in Manchester and I happened to notice that at the War Museum there was a special exhibition all about spies. And I thought, I'm sure there must be some spy radios there and some tales about radio communication as it affected spies during the Second World War. I was right. Let me show you a few clips.
Here is a list of the most important things you will need. Portable radio and spare batteries. Advice will be given to you on the radio, so keep listening. This advice over the radio...
I'm not sure an 1155 would have been used in those days for listening. That'd have been up in the Lancaster over Germany. Radios in suitcases was a way of disguising the radio, or was it? I'm not sure that a man carrying a suitcase down a street in occupied Europe would be anything other than rather suspicious. These days we rely heavily on satellites for long-distance communication. But during the war, we relied heavily on Mother Nature, signals being reflected by the ionosphere, and us ham radio operators today still rely on that. One thing about it is, you can't shoot it down. You can't stop it. While I was at the museum in Manchester, I thought, wonder if I could be a spy. Yes, that's me in the picture. Could I mould into the background by using this cape? I'm not sure, but certainly not if I was carrying a suitcase. It was a fascinating exhibition showing the ingenuity of spies. You had to be clever, you had to be creative, and you had to have your wits about you. The common thread running throughout the whole of this exhibition was radio communication, the need for radio communication. Reading between the lines. Gosh, that brought back memories. The Krogers.
How we got on?
I haven't.
Nothing?
Not a thing. It's no damn good you threatening me either.
What kind of people are these who held the safety of a nation in their hands? Why did they do it? How were they caught? Now these questions are answered in a compelling film called Ring of Spies. And never, never has fact so outstripped fiction for daring and for suspense.
Listen, buddy, I'm not asking you to do anything. I wouldn't get you mixed up in anything, whatever it was.
What are you asking then?
Simply to leave the safe door open for a few minutes on Friday afternoon and then go and powder your nose.
The truth behind the lace curtains of suburbia. The secrets of treason. The startling facts about the spies who lived in this very bungalow at number 45 Cranley Drive, Ruislip, Middlesex.
Oh, hello, Gordon.
Hi, Ellen.
Behind this door were all the tools, the gadgetry of the men and women who form that sinister circle, a ring of spies.
This film is still available on the internet and is well worth watching. At the exhibition, I was intrigued to see that they actually featured this famous bungalow.
This very bungalow at number 45 Cranley Drive, Ruislip, Middlesex.
The bungalow at Cranley Drive was really the nerve centre of information being passed to the KGB. MI5 were aware that documents from Portdown in Dorset, where there was a naval establishment there, underwater establishment, documents were being passed to the KGB that they didn't know, and it took them some time before they sussed out what was happening. And eventually their attention was focused on somebody called Harry Houghton. Now, Harry Houghton appeared to be living beyond his means. He had several rather expensive cars that didn't stack up with the salary he was on, so they actually turned their attention on him. And eventually the ring was uncovered, and MI5 wanted to make sure they'd identified all those in the ring before they made any arrests. Harry Houghton befriended somebody called Ethel G. Ethel G also worked in the same establishment, but she had access to the safe, and he established a relationship with her and made her agree to leave the safe unlocked for a short period on Friday. The reason Friday was the key day was because apparently the office closed over the weekend, so nobody would know if documents had been missing from the safe, provided they were back in the safe before Monday morning. So Harry would take these documents and he would travel up to London, and he was put in touch with somebody called Gordon Lonsdale, who held a Canadian passport but actually was part of the KGB establishment. He would then take these documents down to the address at 45 Cranley Drive, Ruislip, Middlesex, which was occupied by Peter and Helen Kroger. Again, not their real names, they were also KGB spies, but they had established a relationship in the neighbourhood. People knew them, they went across the road to for coffee, etc., with the people to just maintain a sort of a reasonable appearance. And he was known to be an antiquarian bookseller. He sold books and sent them all over the world. Well, actually, what was happening behind those doors at 45 Cranley Drive was something quite different. When Gordon Lonsdale delivered the documents to Peter, he would then photograph the documents and produce a microdot. He would then place a microdot on one of the pages of one of his books, and he would then send that book to pre-arranged addresses around Eastern Europe. He would then set up his radio transmitter and receiver, which was actually hidden under the floor. He'd used a telescopic aerial which he poked up the chimney, so it was a vertical antenna, and he would then send data to the KGB telling them where the book had gone, which book it was, what page the information was on, and of course this was all sent in code. So it was quite an established ring, and it came to be known as the Portland Spy Ring, and it had a lot of attention in the newspapers in the 1950s. They were of course all arrested and put behind bars. Sadly, the couple across the road who had a friendly relationship with the Krogers, their house was occupied by MI5 for quite a few weeks in order to keep an eye on the house and see what was happening. And sadly, the strain on the wife was such that she eventually died about 2 years later. She just didn't recover from the strain she was put under, because she was made to keep up this relationship with the Krogers, even though she then knew that they were under observation by MI5. Quite a difficult situation. So that's the story, really. That's the story of the Krogers, and that story is shown actually in the museum, the War Museum in Manchester. Now, I'm not suggesting, of course, that QRP operators, POTA, SOTA operators are spies. Anyway, they don't carry their gear around in a suitcase, do they? But there is a similarity, isn't there? It's basic equipment. It's getting out with some basic, simple equipment, communicating, not quite knowing what conditions are going to be like, whether you're going to get your messages through, but determination that you're going to get on the air and try and make contacts. You don't know what sort of antenna you're going to use, or perhaps you don't know what the situation is, so you're not quite sure which antenna you can use, whether you can erect it and how it's all going to work out. But you go out there with determination, and I think that's the similarity between us, well, I say us, those that go to the top of mountains, those that go into parks and do all the other exciting operation using basic portable gear and low power. And good luck to you. I think you're doing a great job. So I hope that you've enjoyed this video. I'm not quite sure what to call it really. It was basically me visiting the War Museum in the North, Manchester. Excellent museum, by the way. Me being sort of reminded about spy radio. And I do a bit of QRP operation. I do enjoy sort of basic QRP operation with low power, 4 or 5 watts and a battery and a bit of wire. It's a challenge, isn't it? And I suppose put all that together, and then thinking back to the Second World War, when that sort of communication was actually one of the most reliable routes of getting information back from the front line and from occupied Europe. There we are. I hope you've enjoyed this video. Thank you for your support on this channel. It's much appreciated. I know this is a bit different, this video, but anyway, I thought I'd do it just for fun. And in the meantime, thanks for your support on the website, on our website and the ordering system there. Don't forget, we've got some great offers there. And very often, if you order on our website, you'll see things flash up and you'll get some better deals than you would if you just sort of picked up the phone. Don't be frightened of picking up the phone, of course. If you want to do a part exchange deal or something like that, you've got some questions, pick up the phone and we'll do our best to help you. And we'll always guide you to the best route for the best deal. That's the sort of thing you get from the Superstore group that we're now part of. In the meantime, you take care. As I say, thank you for supporting this channel. Look forward to seeing you in the next video. Bye for now.